If there's something almost everybody who played video games on cartridges can relate to, it's blowing into the cartridges in order to get the game to work. But why did seemingly everyone do it? This predated the internet, so it's not like we all read about it online. Well, my theory is that it comes down to it being the most easily available way of fixing the problem. Fueled by frustration of our games not working, the most primary animal instinct is to yank the cartridge out and blow as hard as we can on the area of the game that connects to the system. But here's the thing, guess what's required in order to blow on the pins of a cartridge? That's right, taking the cartridge out of the system and reinserting it back in. And yes, that is the more likely reason why your game eventually worked. Every time you take a cartridge out and put it back in, the pins are most likely going to be aligned in an ever so slightly different way. Once you get the right connection, this is what would cause the game to work. Unless your game has a ton of dust inside it, and I mean the kind of dust that's the result of just letting your game sit around for a long time without being used, it probably has very little to do with why your game isn't working. Thinking back on it now, I find it really funny that a lot of us would blow on the same cartridge multiple times in a row. Like, take it out, blow on it, put it back in, take it out, blow on it even harder, put it back in, and then it's still not working, so we take it out one last time and blow on it with all the fury of hell itself. As if there's one last little particle of dust impossible to be seen by the human eye that's preventing the game from working. And a lot of times we'd be around friends when we did this, so naturally we wanted to impress them, right? Like, hey, check out how hard I can blow on this cartridge in order to get it to work. It makes sense that this would happen though. Like I said before, it was the easiest available solution, and we all convinced ourselves it was working even though, like I said before, it was actually just the repositioning of the game's pins from being taken out and plugged back in. And actually, in practice, you really don't even have to take the cartridge out all the way. Simply tweaking the position of the cartridge just a little bit will often get the game working. Of course, you may need to try a few times, but I've done this countless times and have always got the game working. The other really popular solution people seem to like is good old rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip, if you do really want to make sure the contacts are clean. It makes more sense to wipe the dust off than blow it away, doesn't it? I mean, if you were to dust something off like a table or a piece of furniture, you wouldn't just start blowing on it, would you? You gotta wipe if you want to get it really clean. And I don't even need to mention how this concept applies to toilet paper, do I? Anyways, I haven't really come across many detractors of this rubbing alcohol Q-tip method, and I've heard from people who have collected for over 25 years that have used this method with no issues at all. I've used this technique myself for over 10 years now without any issues either. You'll want to get the highest percentage of alcohol to ensure that it dries quickly, and you can always use the dry end of the Q-tip when you're done to wipe away any excess moisture. Funny enough, it actually says not to do this on the back of NES games, which is baffling to a lot of us to say the least. You gotta remember though, that a lot of kids were handling these cartridges, and so I guess it makes sense that Nintendo wouldn't trust them. I don't know though, I've never seen anything definitive on what the best way to clean cartridges is, but rubbing alcohol seems to be one where people generally don't think it will harm your games. Ironically enough, blowing on your games actually can harm them, at least in theory. The idea is that by blowing on the cartridges, the moisture from your hot breath will then oxidize and damage the pins. Now, I don't really know how damaging this was because I haven't seen it happen myself, but people seem to agree it's something to be aware of. Funny enough, there's something else that was happening when we blow on our cartridges that was definitely bad for our video games. But this time I'm talking about our consoles, and specifically the NES. You see, this thing had a design flaw where the pin connector inside of the system would actually get stretched apart over time, resulting in loose connections when you try to plug a cartridge in. I used to fix these pin connectors by literally just bending the pins back closer together. I fixed hundreds of these. But anyways, by plugging in a game cartridge, you were in effect breaking your system a little bit every time you plugged in or removed a game. Nice, right? So by taking the cartridges in and out so often to blow on them, you were putting added wear and tear on your console without even knowing it. And the more you stretched out the pin connector on your console, the chances of your games not working would increase a little bit, which of course meant more taking the cartridge out and blowing on it, which we thought was helping. So there we all were, completely clueless as to what was actually working and what was making things worse. And by a loose connection of cause and effect, we believed that blowing on cartridges worked. And of course I was a part of this as well, and so I'm certainly not above it. Also, I know some people refuse to believe that blowing on cartridges doesn't work, but as a firm believer in the power of nostalgia, I don't think I have the heart to tell them not to do it. By the way, the pin connectors and systems that came after the NES fixed that problem by making it so the pins couldn't bend farther apart, at least not like the NES would. So nothing to worry about there. Still, blowing on cartridges certainly wasn't limited to the NES. People were blowing on cartridges all the way up to the N64 days. I feel like blowing on cartridges is probably one of the biggest misconceptions in all of gaming. One of the #1 things people like to bring up to me when I say I'm a big retro video games guy is how they used to blow on their cartridges, and almost every time their mind is completely blown when I give them this information. Kind of makes you wonder what other things we've been doing that we don't understand, doesn't it? Alright, since this is a topic pretty much everybody watching can relate to, I'd be curious to hear some of your personal stories when it comes to this, or perhaps just your thoughts in general. Did you do this with your games back in the day? Also, if you still do it nowadays, has this video changed your mind? I'd be curious if that's the case for anybody. Whatever your thoughts might be, leave those comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.